Okay, so you folks are really digging into the Cold War. Huh. I see you requested a deep dive on not one, but two pretty different looks at that whole era.
Yeah, two very different productions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So first we have a viewer's take on that Cold War history, a critical examination documentary series.
Okay.
And then we have a whole bunch of reactions from IMDb users about that Turning Point series from just last year.
Turning Point, the bomb in the Cold War. Yeah.
That's the one I got to admit. Even I got sucked into that one and binged the whole thing. But anyway.
Right. Well, it's a pretty captivating subject.
It is. It is. So I guess the big question here is, why does this period, the Cold War, still kind of grab us? Why all the interest decades later?
Well, I think there are a few things at play, right? Like, first off, you've got this constant tension, this fear of nuclear annihilation that just permeated life for so long. I mean, that's got to leave a mark, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Duck and cover drills. Those images are seared into my brain.
Exactly. And then you've got these two superpowers locked in this ideological struggle fighting proxy wars all over the globe. I mean, the stakes were just incredibly high.
Yeah, and it really felt like the fate of the world was hanging in the balance for, what, like 40 years?
Pretty much. And then on top of all that, you've got the fact that many of the issues at the heart of the Cold War, things like nuclear proliferation, great power rivalry, those haven't really gone away.
Yeah, it's like we're seeing echoes of that era playing out right now.
Exactly. So by understanding the Cold War, we can maybe get a better grasp on the challenges we face today and hopefully avoid making the same mistakes.
Okay, so that's the big picture.
Yeah.
But we've got these two specific productions to unpack, right? So how about we start with this viewer's commentary on Cold War history?
Good.
All right, so this viewer kicks things off with a pretty interesting comparison. They say this series could be really valuable for younger generations, kind of like the Second World War series was.
Oh,
yeah. They seem to be suggesting that both series kind of serve as a warning, learn from the past so we don't repeat it.
Yeah, that's a really powerful idea. I mean, history can be an incredible teacher, right, if we pay attention.
Totally.
Yeah.
But then things take a bit of a turn. This viewer starts to lay out some pretty serious criticisms. Yeah. They felt like the documentary painted a very skewed picture of the Cold War.
Oh, how so?
Well, basically, they felt like the series went out of its way to portray the USSR as this almost meek, innocent party.
Oh.
Yeah. And on the flip side, they said the U.S. was basically portrayed as the instigator, the one always causing problems.
And this viewer took issue with that portrayal.
Oh, big time. They specifically called out the way the series handled the atomic bombings of Japan.
Ah, yeah, that's a really sensitive subject.
It is. And this viewer felt like the documentary really glossed over the historical context surrounding that decision.
Yeah.
Things like the extent of Japanese war crimes and their unwillingness to surrender.
So they felt like it lacked nuance.
Exactly. They argued that while the devastation caused by the bombs was undeniable, the documentary failed to adequately consider the potential for even greater loss of life if the war had continued conventionally.
That's a really crucial point to consider, right? The whole what-if scenario.
Right, and they didn't stop there. They also claimed that the series made this sweeping statement that nuclear weapons were the sole cause of the Cold War, which they felt was just flat out wrong.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty bold claim and probably an oversimplification. It's important to remember that the Cold War was driven by a complex web of factors, not just the existence of nuclear weapons.
Exactly. You had clashing ideologies,
Yeah.
economic competition,
Yeah.
the whole reshaping of the global power structure after World War II. I mean, it was complicated.
Definitely. So this viewer is saying the series really oversimplified things.
Yeah, and they weren't just unhappy with the portrayal of historical events. They also felt like the series took a hard left turn in the last two episodes.
Oh, interesting. What happened there?
Well, they said that these final episodes felt heavily biased towards a certain political perspective, one they perceived as leftist.
And what specifically led them to that conclusion?
Well, they pointed to a couple of things. One was the implication that the U.S. was somehow solely responsible for the collapse of the Soviet Union, which they felt was a misrepresentation of history.
Yeah, I mean, the collapse of the Soviet Union was a multifaceted event, right? A lot of internal factors contributed to its downfall.
For sure. And they also criticized the way the series depicted the situation with Ukraine, particularly the decision to give up their nuclear arsenal.
Ah, yeah, that's a decision that's been debated ever since.
Right. And this viewer felt like the documentary was pushing a very specific narrative about that decision.
So essentially, they felt like the series was trying to advocate for a certain present-day political position.
Yeah, and they were not happy about it. They called the final episode especially slanted, saying it was almost like a film student's visual essay advocating for continued financial support for Ukraine. Yeah, and they claimed that the episode even went so far as to label anyone who questioned this support as a Russian apologist.
Okay, so that's a pretty strong reaction. It sounds like this viewer felt like the series crossed a line from historical analysis into present-day political advocacy.
Exactly. And it seems like that really rubbed them the wrong way.
Which is understandable. I mean, when you're watching a historical documentary, you expect a certain level of objectivity, right? Not to feel like you're being preached to.
Totally. Okay, so that's one perspective on Cold War history. But now let's jump over to Turning Point, The Bomb in the Cold War, which came out just last year, and see what IMDb users had to say about it.
Okay, so this series takes a broader approach, starting with the development of the atomic bomb and going all the way up to the current situation in Ukraine, right?
You got it.
Yeah.
And it's currently sitting at a pretty impressive 8.4 out of 10 on IMDb.
Wow. So it seems like it's resonated with a lot of viewers.
It definitely has. And as you scroll through the reviews, you see a lot of praise for the historical insights. It provides the quality of the archival footage and the strength of the interviews.
So it sounds like they did a good job on the production side of things.
It seems that way. Some reviewers even went so far as to compare it to The World at War, which is considered a real gold standard for historical documentaries.
Okay, so high praise indeed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But just like with Cold War history, the issue of bias pops up quite a bit in the reviews for Turning Point.
Interesting. What kind of bias are people perceiving this time?
Well, a lot of the reviewers claim that the series has an anti-American or anti-Western slant. Some even called it straight-up left-wing propaganda.
And what specifically led them to that conclusion?
Well, they mentioned a few things. Some felt like certain political figures like President Trump were portrayed in a negative light,
Okay.
while they felt the series kind of glossed over problems in other countries. Like some specifically mentioned Ukrainian corruption, the treatment of ethnic Russians, as things they felt were downplayed or ignored.
So they felt like there was a selective focus.
Yeah, and the reviewers brought up specific examples to support their claims. They mentioned the portrayal of the Rosenbergs, the discussions around the atomic bombings, and the way the Russia-Ukraine conflict was framed as all being particularly biased.
Yeah, those are all pretty sensitive topics, and it sounds like the way they were handled in the series really rubbed some viewers the wrong way.
It definitely did. There was even one reviewer who was upset that the series seemed to link Trump to the execution of the Rosenbergs and the House Un-American Activities Committee, even though he was just a kid when all that happened.
Wow, so some people are seeing connections and interpretations that the filmmakers may not have intended.
For sure. But it wasn't all negative. There were also plenty of reviewers who found Turning Point to be well-balanced, informative, and really important for understanding the world we live in today.
So pretty divided response.
Yeah, a real mixed bag.
Yeah.
Some folks loved it, others felt like it was pushing an agenda.
Well, that's the thing about historical documentaries, right? There's always going to be some level of interpretation involved. And depending on your own perspective and prior knowledge, you're going to react differently to the choices the filmmakers make.
Definitely. And, it's not like these reviewers who liked Turning Point were blind to the potential for bias. They acknowledged it, but they felt like the series overall presented a fair and nuanced perspective.
So for them, the good outweighed the bad.
Exactly. Now, beyond the whole bias debate, there were also some interesting observations about the scope of the series. Several reviewers pointed out that it went beyond just nuclear weapons and delved into the broader history of the Cold War, which some appreciated for its comprehensiveness.
Makes sense. I mean, the Cold War was about so much more than just the threat of nuclear war.
Right. It was about ideology, economics, global power struggles, all kinds of things. And it seems like Turning Point tried to capture all of that.
And
for sure. But of course, not everyone was satisfied. One reviewer actually felt like the series didn't focus enough on the specifics of nuclear weapons. They wanted more details about the technology, the strategy, the potential consequences, all that.
Interesting. So even within those who like the series, there's still room for different opinions on what should be emphasized.
Absolutely. And there was another comment that stood out to me. This one pointed out that the series didn't really touch on the role played by other allied nations like Canada.
Yeah. It's easy to forget that the Cold War wasn't just a U.S. versus USSR thing. Other countries were involved too.
For sure. And it sounds like this viewer felt like their perspective was kind of left out.
Which is a valid point. You always have to be mindful of whose stories are being told and whose are being left out.
Totally. Oh, and there was one more really interesting observation. This one had to do with a quote from Fidel Castro about a potential preemptive nuclear strike during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh.
Yeah, so this reviewer claimed that the series used this quote, but left out some crucial context. Apparently, Castro only advocated for a nuclear strike if Cuba was invaded by the U.S.
Ah, so the way the quote was presented in the series made it seem more extreme than it actually was.
That's what this reviewer is saying.
Yeah.
And they felt like that omission really distorted the meaning of Castro's words and painted him in a much more aggressive light.
Wow, yeah, context is everything, right? You can completely change the meaning of a statement by taking it out of context.
Absolutely. And, it's not like these reviewers were all coming from the same place either. We even had a comment from someone who identified as a former military member.
Okay.
And they said that during the Cold War, they viewed nuclear missiles as a necessary deterrent. The whole idea of mutually assured destruction, keeping everyone in check.
Yeah, that was a logic at the time. Terrifying, but it seemed to work.
It did for a while, at least. So I guess the point is, there are a lot of different ways to look at this period in history, and these two productions, Cold War History and A Turning Point, clearly sparked a lot of debate and strong opinions.
Definitely. Both series tackled this massive, complex topic and attempted to distill it into a watchable narrative. And as with any attempt to simplify history, you're going to run into issues of bias interpretation and the selection of what to include and what to leave out.
Absolutely. So for you listening out there, the big takeaway is that both of these series offer valuable perspectives on the Cold War. But it's so important to engage with them critically, to be aware of the potential for bias, and to seek out a variety of sources to form your own informed opinion.
Exactly. Don't just take one version of history as the absolute truth. Dig deeper, explore different perspectives, and challenge your own assumptions.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Now, here's something to think about as you continue your own deep dive into the Cold War. Given all these varying and sometimes conflicting interpretations of this period, how do you, as someone interested in understanding history, navigate these different narratives?
Yeah, how do you sift through all the information, the opinions, the biases, to arrive at a more nuanced understanding of the past? And what responsibility do we all have to think critically about the information we're consuming, especially when it comes to historical documentaries and other media that attempt to tell complex stories about our past?
Big questions for sure, but I think they're worth wrestling with. So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
See you then.